The story begins in a quiet valley, cradled by rolling hills and dense forests. The village of Glenwood sat nestled there, its people simple and hard-working, tending to their sheep, fields, and families. For as long as anyone could remember, the village had a peculiar legend, a wandering monk who appeared once every 50 years. He would arrive without warning, draped in a humble robe, carrying a weathered staff. No one knew where he came from or where he went, but each visit left behind miracles, mysteries, and whispers of a greater truth. For decades, people had spoken of him. Some believed he was sent by God to test their faith, while others dismissed him as folklore, a tale meant to keep children obedient and villagers humble. It had been nearly 50 years since the monk's last visit, and most of Glenwood had all but forgotten the story. That is, until one chilly autumn evening. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the cobblestone streets. Anna, a young widow struggling to raise her son, Matthew, was returning home from the market. Her heart was heavy, weighed down by unpaid debts and the meager sack of grain she carried. As she passed the churchyard, she noticed a figure standing by the ancient oak tree, his silhouette bathed in the golden light of sunset. His robe was frayed, his head bowed, and his staff planted firmly in the ground. Anna hesitated, her heart quickening. Could it be? "Good evening," she called softly, her voice trembling. The figure lifted his head, revealing a face etched with age but glowing with a serene smile. "Peace be with you, child," he replied. Anna stepped closer, her curiosity overriding her fear. Are you the monk? The one from the stories?" The man chuckled lightly, the sound warm and calming. "I am merely a traveler, seeking shelter and kindness." Word of the mysterious visitor spread quickly through the village. By morning, a crowd had gathered outside Anna's home, where she had offered the monk a place to rest. People whispered and pointed, their curiosity tinged with both reverence and skepticism. One by one, the villagers approached him, sharing their ailments and struggles. A crippled farmer, unable to walk for years, left the monk's presence with steady feet and tears of gratitude. A blind girl regained her sight after he prayed with her, and a barren couple soon rejoiced as the monk blessed them with a promise of new life. But not all were convinced. Jacob, the village blacksmith, was the loudest of the skeptics. "How do we know he is sent by God?" he bellowed in the marketplace. "For all we know, he's just a clever trickster, preying on your desperation." Despite Jacob's protests, the monk remained calm, showing no anger or need to defend himself. Instead, he simply said, "God's truth is not proven by words, but by the fruits of faith." Among those curious was Peter. Peter was a man of reason, a keeper of books and ancient lore. The tale of the wandering monk fascinated him, and he had spent years collecting scraps of information about the monk's past visits. According to his records, the monk had appeared in Glenwood 4 times before. Each time his arrival had coincided with a crisis, famine, plague, or drought, and each time his presence had brought healing and hope, but also questions that lingered long after he disappeared. Peter decided to speak with the monk himself. Late one evening, he found the traveler sitting alone in the churchyard, his staff resting beside him. "Do you mind if I join you?" Peter asked, his voice measured. The monk nodded, gesturing to the bench beside him. "I've studied the stories about you," Peter began. "You come every 50 years, perform miracles, and then vanish. Why? What is your purpose?" The monk smiled gently, his eyes fixed on the distant hills. "I am but a servant, Peter, a messenger sent to remind those who have ears to hear and eyes to see." "Remind us of what?" Peter pressed. "That faith is not a relic of the past, but a living flame, one that must be tended lest it flicker and die." Peter frowned. "And the miracles? Are they proof of your words?" The monk turned to him, his gaze piercing yet kind. "Miracles are not proof. They are gifts, meant to strengthen those who already believe and awaken those who have forgotten. But faith, true faith, does not depend on them." As the days passed, the monk continued his quiet work, healing the sick, comforting the grieving, and urging the villagers to forgive old grievances and care for one another. His words were simple yet profound, filled with scripture and wisdom that seemed to pierce the heart. But not everyone welcomed his message. Jacob grew angrier, his disbelief festering into resentment. One evening, he confronted the monk in the village square, a crowd gathering to watch. "If you are truly sent by God, prove it," Jacob shouted. Call fire down from heaven, part the river, or strike me where I stand." The monk regarded Jacob with sorrowful eyes. "You seek signs, but even if they were given, would you believe? It is not God who must prove himself to you, Jacob, but you who must open your heart to him." Jacob stormed away, his face red with anger. On the monk's 7th day in the village, he announced that he would be leaving at sunrise. The villagers gathered to bid him farewell, their hearts heavy with gratitude and sorrow. Before he departed, the monk spoke one last time. "Remember this, the miracles you have seen are not mine, but his. The words I have spoken are not mine, but his. I am but a vessel, as you all are meant to be. Tend the flame of faith in your hearts, and you will never walk in darkness." With that, he turned and walked away, his figure growing smaller and smaller, until it vanished over the horizon. In the weeks that followed, the village seemed transformed. Old feuds were mended, and kindness flourished. Even Jacob, after much reflection, found himself kneeling in prayer, his heart softened by the monk's words. Peter, ever the historian, wrote down every detail of the monk's visit, adding it to the records for future generations. But despite all his study, one question lingered in his mind. Who was the monk, truly? Some believed he was an angel, others thought he was a prophet, and still, others insisted he was simply a wise and holy man. But Anna, who had first met him beneath the oak tree, had her own answer. "He was a reminder," she said softly, "that God is always with us, even when we forget to look." The legend of the wandering monk lived on, whispered from one generation to the next, and though no one knew when or if he would return, the people of Glenwood kept the flame of faith burning, trusting that when the time was right, he would come again.